Hello, and welcome to another episode of Amplify Live, a new series with Amplify Media where leaders and readers can connect to their favorite authors about their latest projects. And I'm Rachel Billups. I'm so excited to be with you. Now, if you missed our first episode of Amplify Live, go to amplifymedia.com and select free resource link at the top corner of the page, and you'll be able to watch it and other free webinars as well. Now, today I'm speaking with author and pastor Tom Berlin about his newest study, Courage, Jesus and the Call to Be Brave. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Rachel, how are you?
I am awesome. I am really excited to be with you today. Now, before we get into our conversation, I want to remind everybody that is live that they can chat with one another on YouTube and Facebook. And then at the end of our conversation, they're going to have an opportunity to ask you questions. And so be sure to ask questions in the chat, and we'll be sorting those questions and get to those when we can. But first, let's talk a little bit about courage. Tom, you talk about an opportunity when it comes to this pandemic. We've been in a season of just global insecurity and pain. And I'm just curious, did you start writing this book during the pandemic season?
I did. A year ago in March, everybody's life changed. So we all know that. And then, you know about you, but I was working at home for a few weeks. I eventually was able to get back into my office at the church building. But during that time I was at home, every afternoon, I would go over to my neighbor's house. He strained his back, and I would split wood. He has this big wood shed, and I would split wood and put it in. And I filled his wood shed. And one day he goes, you filled the wood shed. He goes, you doing all right out here? I said, well, during that time, it gave me a lot of time to think. And part of what I was thinking about is just all the uncertainty that was around us at that time. And at that time we weren't. The science hadn't caught up yet.
No.
So we didn't know what we were dealing with. We weren't sure what we needed to do, not needed to do. And then there was, larger conflict in the society over a range of issues that are also super important. So we had all that happening, and I started listening as I was cutting the wood, as I was chopping the wood. I started listening. I know this is going to sound really odd, but I started listening to podcasts on Winston Churchill. And I was thinking, when's another time we've been in a global time of anxiety? And I thought, well, World War II. And so I started listening to these podcasts, and some of them had excerpts of his speeches. And I thought, courage is the thing. Like courage is going to be really important. And I had a sense even then that this was going to last a lot longer than it was being predicted at that time. I had no idea it would be this long, But the point is, I began to think more and more about courage. And when I was in high school, I know this is an odd path, but when I was in high school, I did a paper on courage. We had to write this paper from the great books of the Western world. And I chose that topic, and I've always been interested in the topic. And so that's how it came together.
Oh my goodness. Now, I'm very curious about this. As you were writing the book or even kind of rereading, were you like, oh, I really needed to hear that for myself? Were you writing to yourself as a pastor, as a leader?
You've written books. You wrote a book that on the same topic, be bold. And so I don't know about you, but as an author, I write books that I write books that I'm curious about the topic, or I write books that I think I'm doing my own work. This is definitely in that latter category.
Yeah.
I wanted to break down courage into its component parts. I wanted to figure out what are the parts, what makes up courage? Like, how do people become courageous? What are the shared things that they've got? And I wanted to do that research again. I'd done a little bit of that when I was a teenager, but frankly, I didn't remember a whole lot of it.
It's been a minute, Yeah.
For some of us, it's been a longer minute than others. Yeah.
That's incredible. Now, I'm wondering, when it comes to that, I've noticed you kind of laid out courage in a very specific way. I mean, you talk about the characteristics of courage. Let's lean into this a little bit. Courage is clarity, conviction, candor, hope, fortitude, and love, because I've got my copy right here.
I was like, she memorized the book.
Why would you do it in this way? What inspired you to break it down into characteristics?
I actually went back to what are called the Great Books. It was a long ago series that Encyclopedia Britannica put together. I think that was who put it together. And I looked back to the old literature. I don't want to make this sound like I spent hours and hours and hours, but I did go back and reread some of that. Theologically, and what you find if you do that is that there are 4 cardinal virtues that have been identified for years. There's wisdom, there's justice, there's prudence, and there's courage. Then there are 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. Those come from 1 Corinthians 13. But in Christian theology broadly, those 4 cardinal virtues and those 3 theological virtues are discussed. So if you read Ambrose, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, I am definitely making myself sound deeper than I am, Rachel. I just want to footnote that.
Right now, I'm like, when did you have time to read this during the pandemic?
Okay, but see, that's the thing. Like that's why you write a book, because you want to do the study yourself. Well, once I started breaking it down, courage is the virtue that unlocks all the other virtues. What the ancient writer said is that until a person is courageous, they will not enact wisdom. Until someone's courageous, they will not enact justice. So you get the idea. And then I looked and I realized, wow, hope is a big piece of courage. Love is what drives courage. That's why people become courageous, not because you were born as Thor,
Right.
or some superhero, Wonder Woman. You become courageous because there's something you love so much that you're willing to take risk.
Yeah.
So courage is innately connected also to risk threshold and some other matters.
It's really interesting that you say that, because a lot of people ask me, Rachel, where do you get your courage? Be bold. Where do you get that boldness? Where do you get that fierce? As though I was born with it.
Right.
As though I was born with it. And what I've discovered is it's when I'm willing to take risk, uncertainty, vulnerability. Ugh.
Yeah.
That's when it gets crazy.
And sometimes that's in a very, it's a micro trait. So I'm courageous because I have a child I love, and therefore I am going to stick with them. And that's going to require fortitude, which is courage over time and courage through ups and downs. And so it's just this one person I'm focused on. Sometimes it's a societal issue. And so I'm willing to lobby with a politician. I'm willing to speak truth to an organization. I'm willing to do that because, I have a love around a certain topic, or I feel the conviction that Christ is telling me, no, you got to hang in there. Like, I know you're tired. And, Jesus does a lot in my life. This is what I sense. I feel like Jesus says a lot, I don't care. And I don't know if you have this, but I go to Jesus, I'm like, I'm really tired. I'm not sleeping well. And he's like, I know, and I love you, but I don't care because this has to be worked on. Well, what that really is not Jesus telling me that. That's the conviction of following Jesus. And once Jesus becomes your Lord, you lose your vote a lot.
Your life is not your own.
Right. Your life is not your own. So it's again, and that's not born with it.
Yeah.
That's your sanctification.
So I'm going to push you even further, Tom, on this question, because I'm really curious about this. You have been a pastor for a bit, for a time.
For years.
And how in your pastoral ministry have you developed courage? Because I imagine those first few years, like, there wasn't a lot of courage there. So how over time have you seen yourself have to step out courageously? Yeah.
I feel so blessed by the laity that I've worked with and served with. They have enriched my life. And I was very conflict averse when I entered ministry. I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and we were sort of taught, if you're in a conflict, you've done something wrong.
Oh yeah.
Something's gone wrong. That was the thing. And now in the home I grew up in, there was a lot of candor. My father would have loved to have avoided conflict, but my mother was never going to let him get away with that. and my mom is a very persistent person, and I mean that in a really positive, strength-oriented way. And so I had that conflict. Well, as an adult in a church, as you know, there's going to be conflict. And you pretty soon figure out that there's some conflict that I have a phrase that goes through my head. There's nothing in this for me. Like that's not a conflict. There's nothing in that advances the gospel. There's nothing in that blesses the vulnerable. That's just a conflict. Like red carpet, blue carpet. That's all yours, right?
You don't take any of that personal.
No. I don't take it. Well, it's better than that. I just don't care. Like at the end of the day, I don't care if it's red or blue. That's not there's nothing there. But there are some conflicts that are really conflicts where, the Holy Spirit is saying to the leader, you're going to have to work through this one. You're going to have to be with people through this. And I believe that the sanctification of the individual and the congregation are at risk when we don't have the courage to do the work.
Oh, come on.
And the way the lay people help me is I would sometimes meet with laity in our church who I just really respected, and we'd have lunch together or breakfast. And I'd say, I would just ask them questions. Tell me something about this that that I don't know. Tell me how you do your work in ways that are so effective. I noticed in the last meeting, you were able to say this. How did you learn to say that? And I just let people mentor and coach me for a long time. I've had staff here that I work with at Flores. I had an executive director one time. She came to my office and she said, you have just got to learn to be present in this conflict. Like I need you to be present at the table. I'm watching you check out. Well, when people do that with you long enough, you start gaining skills.
Yeah.
And so I'm so grateful to the lady who developed me. And what I've tried to do is to say some of those in the book, especially the chapter on candor. I tried to give people enough sort of an entry point, because I think that most people are like me. Most people are struggling with that. And they're trying to figure out how to do it and then do it well. Well,
in the church, I feel like we stink at conflict. It's just not a skill set that we have very well. Yeah.
I totally, and a lot is lost when we don't weigh into it. Now, I don't think we need to have unnecessary conflict.
That's wise.
Yeah. And some laity, some clergy, some days I get in a mood.
Never, Tom Berlin.
I've got a little sign I've put up on my door. Actually, I've told my assistant, I've just said, I am not fit for human consumption today. Like, don't let anybody in the room. It's not going to go well for me or them. And so I think you've got to identify times in your life when you're like that. And I hope that's only like an hour of your day. But to your point, which is the richer point, we've got to be willing to be courageous enough. And that's why understanding that these issues are important. Now, you asked me about the list of chapter titles.
Yeah.
We hit a space of self-definition in the congregation I serve. And I've been here 24 years, so it's been a long run so far. And we hit this place where we were just doing some self-definition, and we were having a conflict. And I had a Post-it note, and I can see it from here. It's on the bottom of my monitor, and it says, it has these 4 words. And some of those words were clarity, conviction, candor, courage, and encouragement. And I thought, these are the things that I owe my church right now. I owe them that as their pastor. And when courage popped up, what I realized is I was still following a very hard wired pattern of mine that is nobody else's fault. It's my stuff to deal with. I could feel myself wanting to walk away from the conflict, when in fact what I needed to do is to stand in the midst of it and do the work of peacekeeping. I don't mean peacekeeping like quelling the conflict. I mean peacekeeping like we're going to work through this, and we're going to have some self-identification. And so those words end up as chapter titles, along with the cardinal virtues, along with the theological virtues. It's all blended in there.
Tom, as you're talking, I've heard you talk about vulnerability. I've heard you say, I had to learn from others. I've heard you talk about how self-aware you had to become throughout this process. And I think all of those are tools in our toolbox as churches and as leaders that we certainly need, and sometimes remain fallow or underdeveloped. And so I'm so glad that you touched on all those things.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Rachel, there was a couple in this church who, in my early years, there was a disagreement about a matter, and they decided to leave the church. And it was not a the last time they were in the building physically. I since have spoken with them, and it's fine. But when they first left the building, it was a confrontation.
Mm.
And I realized as I drove, I used to drive past their house. I think I even talk about it in the book. When I drove past their house, I could feel adrenaline being released. I could feel my blood pressure go up. I could feel my heart begin to beat. And you have something like that happen 4 or 5 times, and all of a sudden you start saying, what is wrong with you?
Mm.
Like, why does this have such power? Well, courage, if you start to read about courage, if you start to read about being bold, the title of your, Be Bold, the title of your book, if people will do that work, they will begin to understand themselves, what they're doing, what they're not doing, what they have, and what they're missing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I wrote the book.
Mm.
I want to help people gain more courage. But to your point, it really does require self-examination, which, by the way, is a Christian practice.
Yeah.
Right? That's a spiritual practice that we've got to have in place.
Yeah. Well, speaking of spiritual practices, at the beginning of your introduction, you talk about courage being in the Bible like more than 100 times, this word courage, and looking at scripture, but also the early church leaders as models for courageous kind of leadership. When you think about all of the people that you studied, all this research that you did, what were some of your favorite stories of courage?
Yeah, that's just a really, so there are the big ones that are commonly known. If you want to read about courage, read about John Lewis. I read his book, Across That Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, Lewis's chapter on hope helped me understand things about the Christian faith that I never knew. And he said that when he was alive, he got this question, how did you go across the bridge? Like, you knew it was coming. You knew you were going to get beat up. You knew it was going to be terrible. And he said, we already knew that the deed was done. We could already see the future where everybody was treated equally. We could see the future where everybody had a right to walk across that bridge. And we were marching into that future, and we knew there were going to be blows along the way. But when I looked at the people coming at me, I could see something they couldn't see yet. And he talks about it. He was a deep Christian. He is just a powerful understanding of that. That was such a blessing to me to learn that. When I think about things that I feel like I can see already, but that haven't happened, and it helps me hold my conviction. Because, Rachel, when you do the work of courage, it's so easy to get anxious and depressed. It's so easy to feel like I'm just done. So they're the big ones. There's John Lewis. There's Churchill, right? I mean, people often say about, good thing America came into World War II. We beat fascism, Nazism. What we should be saying is there was one island nation that for about 3 years kept total chaos from reigning around the globe. And the person who led that at that time was Winston Churchill. And the English people, you talk about courage. So I did a lot of reading about that time period to understand how Churchill as a leader transferred those traits into the English people. It's remarkable what they did during that time. The Blitz, being bombed every single night, getting up in the morning, coming out of the subway station, going home to see if you still had a home. And then saying, you know what, we're all going to do our bit. It's just amazing. Those are stories of courage. But once you start reading about courage and thinking about courage, it becomes like flypaper, and it just attracts things to it. And so another great story during that time is we have a relationship with an elementary school down the street. It's got the second highest Title I free and reduced lunch population in this county. And a lot of the children there are with immigrant families, and so they're just starting this whole process, right? And they're vulnerable, many of them. One girl that my wife works with, and we've been doing a lot of food distribution, like your church and others have been doing, and just checking in on families, saying, "Are you okay?" Her mother died right before the pandemic. She is I'd say about 10 years old. She's the primary English speaker in the household. She has a little infant brother that she's now helping to care for. Her aunt, when the pandemic first started, her aunt had not arrived and then suddenly couldn't get in. And we're trying to figure that out. that girl is courageous, right? and she's doing that every single day.
Yeah.
And her number one question is, can you help me connect to my school? See,
Wow.
she didn't have a laptop sitting in her living room. She didn't have a parent who was her dad was at work all day long when it was time to talk to the teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he works an hourly job. He can't just,
Yeah.
So my point is, they worked all that out. My wife was in no way the magic wand that made everything work. She was a part of some things, but they did that. That's courage.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important when we talk about courage to really do the both and, to look at the grand, big stories, but also to look at the expressions of courage that are happening in daily lives. There's a couple in my church. This man has ALS. Every time I see him, he can do a little less.
Mm.
He is a man of such faith. He loves God. He doesn't feel abandoned. He doesn't feel, again,
Yeah.
So you start reading the book, and then suddenly you just look around, you're like, oh my goodness, they're all around me right now. And I draw hope from those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rachel, don't you think it's one of the best things about being a pastor?
Yeah.
Is that you get to draw hope from the people you serve?
Oh, absolutely. I'm way inspired by everybody that I experience. This is going to sound a little weird. It's why I love to do a eulogy at a funeral, because every single person that I get to tell their life story makes me want to be a better person. Makes me say,
such a privilege.
oh my goodness. Makes me say, I've got to be a better mom. I got to be a better pastor. Like, it's amazing.
Karen said to me years ago, she's like, you know what, when you come home from having done a wedding, like, that's great. You're in a good mood. But when you come home from having done a funeral, you're a better husband.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. And I hope that people are hearing us say that it's an honor and privilege, but it shapes us. And other pastors who maybe are new to this whole being a pastor thing, don't underestimate the power of a great funeral for your church or for yourself, because
and the people you're going to visit and be with prior to the funeral, like, it's the lives that we see lived.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate to serve a church where people really want to live the gospel.
Yeah.
They want to be generous. They want to be kind. They want to serve their community. They want to be the Christians who aren't an audience.
Yeah.
Or who just want to feed, give me. They want to be people that actually get their hands dirty, go out and do things because they believe they're disciples.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you just pointed out, that's what shapes us. So your book has a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And I think that's a powerful thing, because that's how we see it lived out.
You're exactly right. You're absolutely right. You said something that really just evoked something in me. You were talking about Winston Churchill and how he told the entire country, you got to do your bit. I wonder, Tom, how have you encouraged your people, your congregation, the people in your community to do your bit? And then how have you had to be courageous when they didn't exactly want to do their bit?
Yeah. Rachel, I'll tell you on the first part, I can give you a lot of answers. I think the key is, as church leaders, staff members, key lay leaders in, church council members, whatever you are, we have to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, the primary thing that we did here is we just gave people opportunity.
Yeah.
And often lay people were coming to us saying, hey, could we? And, getting to yes, that's a really important thing. Now, you don't get to every yes. Sometimes during a pandemic, we established a value at the very beginning of this, which was safety. And so we had to run everything through that safety value and make sure it was safe. But we just found there were lots of things we could do, and there were a lot of partnerships that we can enjoy. So we had an organization called She Believes in Me that is also in this elementary school. A lot of our church members are a part of it. They decided they were going to do food distribution, and they came to us. The woman that runs it was doing this out of her garage. And again, I just thought it was sort of this courageous thing to reorient your life. And so finally we were talking and we said, hey, come into our fellowship hall. Mm-hmm. Like, we've got this big empty building right now. Just come on in. So they moved for a time period for months. They did everything out of our church building. Well, that enabled a lot of our church members to do things. We did we called people and got our lay people to do that. We've done great with notes. We've made sure that we send prayer blankets. And, so my point is, you could go through a long list.
Yeah.
in everybody's church, there's a context they uniquely understand. Just be creative and give them the opportunity. And I've been really fortunate. I have not experienced, I'm in a part of the country that is more pandemic cautious. And so I haven't had a lot of pressure to reopen or to do things faster than the science would tell us to do them. And I've been really grateful for that, because it's just not an argument that I'm aware. If people feel that, they've not made it overly clear to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. And I just,
Yeah.
count it as a gift.
Now, Rachel, there are times as a pastor where I've suggested things, or I've had convictions that didn't match the convictions of the congregation. That is absolutely a part of being a pastor and part of being a church. And you have to sort that. But, I think when we speak of courage, as clergy, we've got to have a sense of conviction about what we're doing. And I think the main thing we're trying to do is to help people grow in the Christian life. Our job is to help people become sanctified, which means we want them to be more and more loving and live more and more like Jesus would live if Jesus was in our situation.
Yeah.
And I think that it's such a powerful thing to help people on that journey, but they're going to have to be courageous. He just always asks us to do things that we don't have the power to do. One of the texts we use in here is in the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus sends the disciples out on their first mission, and it says he gave them all power and authority. And it's really important to remember that he gave it to them. And then he said, don't take a tunic, don't take all this. And he's like, don't take anything. And I think what he's really doing is helping them to learn how to trust God. Yeah. And stop leaning on their own inner strength. Because I don't know about you, but I find my inner strength is dramatically overplayed. It's like, I always think it's like 2 miles long and it's like 10 inches,
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of people see what we do. Maybe it's a platform, whatever it is, and they just assume that we're these fearless human beings. But the reality is, like, every day I've got to talk myself into things. I've got to trust that the Lord is going to give me what I need in the moment that I need it. And frankly, if I don't take the risk to step out in faith and say, okay, God, I trust you, then I don't feel like I grow. I think I become stuck. And man,
I was talking to a guy in our church at the beginning of the pandemic. He was a friend of mine and a very active member here. And he's a CEO of a company, and they have a division in India, and it has a lot of engineers. And as soon as the pandemic started, he started getting so creative. He made sure everybody had Wi-Fi in their home, which in India, not everybody has Wi-Fi in their home. Yeah. So he said, we're going to make sure everybody's got Wi-Fi in their home. We're going to make sure everybody's got the equipment they need. And they ran to get this accomplished in March of last year. And when I asked him, I said, tell me what motivated that? I'm thinking he's going to talk bottom line, profit margin, all that. He said, I'm just so worried about our employees.
Oh, wow.
He said, so he did these courageous things, the creativity they took risk on investing in that. But really, why did he do that? It was about love. He actually cares. Now, I would argue that is arising from his Christian convictions. Yeah. That's arising from how Jesus is the Lord of his life. And so whether people are in the marketplace, I mean, my goodness, teachers, think about the courage of teachers right now. All they've had to push themselves to do, and they can't, the ones that are Christians, it's an act of their, I'm going to talk about this on Sunday, so I'm thinking about it, but, it's an act of their Christian discipleship. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I could talk a lot. I'm married to a teacher. My little sister's a teacher. My sister-in-law is a teacher. To see some of their creativity has been amazing. And, one of the things, sometimes it's courageous. I know early in our conversation, you said, sometimes I just get tired. Sometimes it's courageous just to be honest and say, I'm tired. I'm tired of it. And that's a long list of stuff, but I'm tired of it. Maybe speak a little bit to that. If our leaders or our pastors or lay people find themselves in a place where they're just tired of all of this, because we just hit the 1 year mark when kind of the world just shut down. Yeah. I find that a lot of people are tired A lot of people are articulating some cranky crustiness when it comes to hitting the 1 year mark. What does courage look like now?
So the chapter on hope talks about some of that, because there's one thing when I'm physically tired. There's another thing when I've got a weariness because I don't feel hope. When I've lost hope, those are two different things. One needs a nap, and it needs Sabbath. I mean, there's a reason.
Yeah.
There's a reason God told you to do that once a week, but the other needs. I think the other is more akin to the way spiritual authors talk about the dark night of the soul. A lot of St. John of the Cross and others really felt that the dark night of the soul was sometimes a gift from God to help you grow to a new level. And I don't mean that God like afflicts you with it. It's that what they wanted to say is enter it into a space and look at it graciously and ask, what am I learning about myself now?
Yeah.
So a week ago, I hit that space of just being tired, and but it felt more than that. I felt like I was getting a little bit hopeless, and what I did know is that I was not becoming better company, and so I just left. Like I had some things to do related to my job, and I just told some folks, "Hey, I'm not going to make the deadline until Monday." And oh, by the way, you know what the great pandemic phrase is? Thank you for understanding that. So you don't say, I'm sorry that you won't get this till Monday. You say, thank you for understanding that you won't get this until Monday, which I love. So I sent a couple of those. And then I got in my car and I went out. My parents just got to the place. They live in a center that's really nice. But they've done a great job with guarding health. And it was the first week that they've been able to have visitors.
Oh, awesome.
In months. Well, my wife and I had been out earlier in the week, but on Friday I just thought, I'm going to go out and just see my folks. It was interesting how attending to that shifted me. And then we just did some things. I was like, hey, Dad, I hear there's some new walking trails over at the museum nearby. And what do you say we go check that out? And my mom didn't want to go, but my dad did. And he and I just had this really nice time together. Well, I'm giving you that example, but my point is, when we've got to attend to ourselves and understand that in attending to ourselves, we're attending to the component parts of courage. You asked me very early in this, why these chapter titles? Because if you examine if you examine the recipe that is courage, you'll take care about the ingredients and how you put them into your life.
Yeah.
And hope is one of those ingredients. So I would just caution folks or suggest to people, there's a difference between being tired and feeling like I'm losing hope. And the Bible says, hope, if we have hope in Christ, it does not disappoint us.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it's never going to feel lost to us.
Yeah.
So I think what I did well that day is I got some time alone in a car. And I didn't fill the time with a bunch of noise, by the way. I just did some thinking. I got some time with some people I love. When I came home, I took it easy that night. I didn't say, I've got to make up all my email I missed. I didn't do that. I just put it aside. And I am not the world's best at that. But because I read the book,
I read my book.
Yeah. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Rachel, I'm inspiring myself. So
that's exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah. So one last question before we turn to questions that people have for you. Say I'm a pastor, say I'm a layperson that's getting ready to do your study. What advice would you give them as they prepare for their people?
Say that again. Oh, the study, preparing for a study.
Yeah, you're getting ready to prepare. They're getting ready to prepare.
Okay. The thing I would say, notice that the word courage is embedded in the word encouragement. And one of the things I would say is when you go into that room, just know this, you've already got people in the room that are experts on courage.
Yeah.
I mean, the book is a great way to have the conversation. And if you use the videos as well, I do these videos with a guy in our church who's literally a pro, and he just always he pushes me to be more creative. So we stand in front of the monuments in Washington D.C., which is where I live. I could do that during the pandemic, and so you see, and a lot of people don't get to come to Washington. So we thought it would be really interesting to reflect on that. My point is, the book and the Leader's Guide and that's going to give you what you need. Just read it, prepare. But when you get in there, realize, look at the group and say, on this Zoom call, in this room, however you're doing it, there are courageous people already, and your job is to unlock their stories. Every one of them has a big story about courage, but they also have their daily stories. But here's the thing. Most of them don't know it, and most of them don't give themselves any credit.
That's right.
So part of what I'm trying to do is, when I'm in a setting like that, I want to ask questions that evoke, that require them to tell their stories a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say brag on themselves, because that, when you put it in that construct, people won't do it. Or let other group members brag on other group members.
Oh yeah.
But my goal is, when they leave, I want them to be encouraged. I want them to be infused with a sense of, I can be a courageous person too, because they're doing important things in the world. They're raising families. They're working with children. They're taking care of spouses or parents. They're like, this life ain't easy.
Yeah.
So we've got to help each other find the courage that we need.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Disciples helping disciples. I love that. That's so great. Yeah. So let's turn our attention towards some questions that folks are asking. One of the questions that we have is, how do you think the pandemic is pushing the church, big C, to be more courageous? How do you think the pandemic is pushing the church, big C, to be more courageous?
Yeah, I think that most churches suffer, and I really do mean, there's a reason. It's kind of a funny thing we talk about. It's I heard someone say today that they're a Baptist, and they always, whenever they have a transition of a pastor, they say, we want a pastor with a clear vision. We want a pastor that brings a lot of energy so that we can keep doing everything the way we do it. He said it, I didn't. But the point is, right now, the pandemic helps you understand the world has changed, and it already was changing. Yeah. But it's accelerated. So around the church I serve, a lot of us are trying to figure out, what are the things we did before the pandemic that we're not going to do anymore?
That's good.
We're just not going to do them. And because, you know what, they kind of lost their edge beforehand, but it's the courage to say, no, we're not going to do that. Now, what are the things that we did before the pandemic that need to be changed for the current time? So, what are the things that used to be done in person that now need to be both in person and online, or, whatever. Then the next category is, what are the new things that we've learned during the pandemic that we're never going to stop doing? Yeah. And how do we do that without killing everybody in terms of time and energy and depleting everybody? And that set of questions will require the church to be courageous, because everything I just said takes risk. Oh, yeah. And some people have very high risk thresholds. I try to maintain a higher risk threshold. And then some people have a really low one. But here's the beauty about courage. When you study courage, Aquinas, Augustine, what they identified is this. Courage is the thing not only that tells you what to do, it also tells you what not to do. Yeah. You're standing on the bridge. The person next to you says, jump into the water. It's really fun. Good idea or bad idea? Courage will sometimes allow you to jump because you know it's going to be safe, and sometimes tell you it's not worth the risk. You could really damage yourself. Yeah, yeah. So when people talk about courage, they tend to think it's the jumping. Yeah. But courage actually helps prudence enact itself. So that sometimes like, I kind of want to jump, but maybe that's not the wise thing to do right now. So as churches do this work, they've got to have those two qualities.
Is there anything that you've started doing during this pandemic season that has really surprised you? Like, oh my goodness, that worked. I never imagined that would work.
In what context?
Well, in the church, like the church that you're serving. Is there anything that you're doing that you're like, how did that work?
It never occurs to me that people want to see me do anything on social media. It just never occurs to me. Like, and people are like, why don't you do that? Why don't you make, or a video that we send around on an email at the church? And I'm like, nobody wants to see that. And then we discovered, no, people actually, so we do this thing called the daily lift. It's a daily devotion. It's like 3 to 5 minutes. People love that thing. And I thought, they don't want to see more of us, more of me, So, and I'm not the only person who does it. It's not all me, but that's one thing. Yeah. We would have never started that. But what we realize is people need a little extra encouragement.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, do we think that's going to go away when this pandemic goes away? Mm-mm. Like life's still going to be challenging. So, and what people said is it gave them a touch point. during each day, gave them a little touch point to remember their discipleship. For a pastor, that's as good as it gets.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting question about courage and encouragement. It says, do you foresee a revival in the church? And how can we use courage to encourage such a revival?
The word revival is really interesting because it takes us back to a certain form.
Yeah.
So if the question is, do you foresee a revival? Hard for me to predict. Hope so. Revivals tend to happen when the Holy Spirit falls in such a way that a broad number of people, many of whom were not believers prior to the revival, become believers. Do I hope that happens? Absolutely. Would that take courage? Absolutely. Right now, if you mean, should we start doing camp meetings again? And if you do a camp meeting, I've got nothing against that, but that arose in American Methodism in a certain time period, and it's less prevalent today than it was then. So if by revival you mean we're going to hold this tent meeting, or there's going to be a sawdust trail, or there's going to be a sinner's bench, or there are a lot of things that were used in a certain time. Here's my question back to the person who asked: what would a revival look like today?
Yeah, that's good, Tom.
Like maybe the revival would look like the church actually having a voice and being willing to talk about racial reconciliation and racial justice.
Yeah, come on.
And do that in a Christ-centered, theological, Holy Spirit-filled space where we weren't doing it because we were, progressive liberal. We were doing it because our Lord and Master Jesus Christ told us to have the conversation and repent of our own sin.
Come on. We're going to have a revival right here.
Well, that's a revival, right?
Yeah, I love that.
So you see what I'm saying? Yeah. I love the word. I love what the person's asking. But I think a revival today is going to look different than a revival from the late 1700s, early 1800s.
Oh, absolutely. All new forms, all new day, all new forms. Yeah, I really love that.
And Rachel, that's one example. We could give a dozen others.
Yeah. Now, this person is asking a question, and I think it's centered around those persons that you were looking at or are studying. Dr. Bethune is a wonderful example of courage. Do you have a subject for your next book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We in the videos, we use these memorials in Washington, D.C., and a lot of folks may not be familiar with Dr. Bethune. And so I wanted, I wrote a book called Reckless Love. That was the last book I wrote.
Yeah.
And in that book, the thing I wanted to study was my own understanding of what it meant to love God and love my neighbor, the great commandment, as I love myself. Mm-hmm. And sort of the racial reckoning that this country has been in was happening at that time. And what I wanted to do was to live into that. As somebody who grew up in Virginia, which, in the Shenandoah Valley, like we have a wee bit of a racial history here. That's the understatement. If you don't know me, that's an understatement. And I wanted to study that. I was doing interfaith work with other clergy in this area. We did a bus trip to places in Virginia and experienced that together. My point is, you'll see that in this book as well. Now, the person just asked me, what's the subject for my next book? One subject that probably won't be a next book yet is the beauty. I believe that God is the most beautiful being in the universe, and I believe that God has put beauty all around us.
Yeah.
William Wilberforce, who was the great abolitionist of England, who really was in the Parliament and helped ended slavery, he found God in the spider web.
Yeah.
He saw the beauty around him, and he was so upended by it that he had a deep Christian experience and gave his life to God again. I think that there's something really important about noticing beauty. And during this pandemic, I've been taking a lot of walks and trying to notice the small things and the large. So anyway, that's an idea that I've got. I think that we're really smart as people, not just authors, but pay attention to what God has you thinking about.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's really, really good. Tom, when I think about that, I think about my 4-year-old, because the way that she sees the world is just inspiring. There's a lot of awe and wonder in her and her perception of the world. And a lot of times I say to myself, stay curious, like Sarah's curious.
That's it.
Yeah.
Rachel, let me ask you a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
When you read Courage and you thought about Be Bold,
Yeah.
What were the overlaps for you?
Yeah.
I mean, what came out of your mind? I'm not asking you to do analysis on this book. I'm really
No,
more curious about
more
your book.
curious. Yeah. What was super interesting, the way in which you told stories from the Bible, I had that same kind of my book is really stories from the Bible that meet my story, that meet the reader's story.
Yeah.
And so I just love the use of story. I mean, story is the most powerful tool that we have. I mean, everybody has a story to share. Now, you were talking about how often when we're in a group of people or leading a class that people don't recognize the story that they have within. And I feel like my book was a big old invitation to say, look, I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to be really honest and frank and blunt and say some things that preachers don't usually say and be real vulnerable. And I'm inviting you into that same bluntness and vulnerability, because I really do believe that God can take our entire story and redeem it, restore it, renew it, and frankly, help shape someone else's life because of it. So it's the power of story that I just see as a major theme to courage. And we need the story of other people, not just my own story, but I was shaped by so many other people as well. Yeah. We have more questions that are coming up. Do you think churches will hold on to those who have tuned in by Zoom during the pandemic? Or I'm going to extend that conversation into via Zoom, via a live stream, via Facebook, via YouTube. Are they going to stay tuned in?
So let me change the question and put it in the context of our conversation here. What type of courage would a pastor and key lay people have to exhibit if they wanted to retain the people that have tuned in by Zoom? What would you need to do? We have taken some space in our church that was a closet, and it had many treasured things in it, and we've turned it into a bit of a recording studio. And it's not NBC Studios. It's not like don't get too blown away, but we made an investment.
Yeah. And
I think it was a courageous thing to do, because here's the thing, we're ministering to people right now that we weren't ministering to before. Now, we've obviously gained some people whose churches closed down. They don't have live stream capacity. And I hope all those people walk back into their church buildings.
Amen.
I want all those churches to recollect. I want all those pastors to have all those people. That's what I'm for. And we sort of say that from time to time. But I also say that, a lot of the content we're creating, you can do it on a Wednesday evening. You can do it while you're on a bike, a stationary bike. You can, while you exercise. Yeah. While you exercise, while you walk. My point is, one of the things that we're discovering is we've got families who are accessing our church because some of the families here with us, some of the families across the country, but now the family is meeting and they're talking about what they've experienced. What's it take to retain that type of a family discipleship, Jesus-oriented relationship?
Yeah.
Where they're really talking about things. So I just think that's, but you have to have the courage to try some new things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Tom, I want to say thank you to you. I want to thank everybody who's participated in this live event, and for all of the questions that you asked. This has really been incredible. And certainly do you have anything else you want to say, Tom, before?
I do.
I'm like, I see it in your face.
Yeah, you saw the hand go up. Hey, Rachel, I just want to compliment you. You may not know it, but you're really good at this. You need to do more of what you're doing. You'd also be great in the chair I'm sitting in, but I just want to say you bring a lot of energy, a lot of life, and I can see why things are going so well at Ginghamsburg.
Oh, thank you, Tom. See, you're encouraging me. Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tom. And thank you, friends. I am so glad that I had this opportunity to talk to Tom and that you were able to experience this with us. Now, I want you to know you're going to be able to share this conversation and watch it on demand at Amplify. Now, if you're not already, please subscribe to Amplify Media's Facebook and YouTube pages so you can watch future webinars. And thank you, Amplify Media, for sponsoring the series. Stick around for a few seconds to learn more about the streaming resources and other tools that they provide to help churches online. Friends, have an incredible day, and thank you for joining us.